Hello everyone, I am Ankit and you're watching StudyIQ IAS English. Now last night a very important development happened. In a phone call between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Donald Trump, both of these two leaders agreed to sign a trade deal between India and US. Now in our today's video, we'll try to understand why every country wants to sign a trade deal with India. But despite this desperation, you need to understand there were some reasons that led to delay in the signing of this trade deal. So we'll also understand that. In the meanwhile, we'll also cover what were the measures taken by Indian government in order to diversify its trade during the tariff policies imposed by US President Donald Trump. And then we'll understand the role both of these leaders played in the negotiations between these two countries. And before we conclude, we'll also understand the impact of this trade deal on the economies of India and US and the broader geopolitics that is going on in the world. So please stay tuned for the discussion. The notes which I will be using in our today's session, you can download them but going to a particular Telegram channel called as ATS Live. And while you're in this particular Telegram channel, please do not forget to hit the subscribe button as well. So let us start by understanding the context of the development. Now, the time has come when we can safely say that India and US have finally agreed to sign a trade deal which was under negotiation for a long period of time. Effective immediately, the United States has declared that they will lower the tariffs that they impose on the goods exported by India into the US from earlier 50% to now 18%, which is one of the lowest among all major economies when it comes to trade with United States. Now, this development comes after many back and forth negotiation that happened between these two countries. You need to understand India quietly addressed several of the US demands in the budget, and at the same time it also began aggressively signing trade deals with other countries including the UK, including New Zealand, Australia, etc., which in a way pressurized the United States in order to sign a trade deal with India. So let us understand each and every factor in detail, but we'll start with by understanding why so many countries are desperate to sign a trade deal with India. And there are many economic and political reasons as well. First, you need to understand India now has the world's largest population, and this world's largest population has rising aspirants. Now you need to understand India has the world's largest population, and this world's largest population has rising aspirations, which means that you have 1.4 billion consumers located in India. And let me tell you, which country would not want to send its goods and services and sell them into India, right? So this is the first reason. Because of a large population, because of a growing market, because of a increasingly aspiring economy, many countries want to send their goods and services and want to sell them in India. Second, after COVID-19 pandemic, when the world was under restrictions, people saw the risk when most of the economic works were going on in China. So the world after COVID-19 pandemic became aware that they need to find an alternative to the China called as China plus one strategy. Under this strategy, the firms would want to relocate some of their manufacturing units to other countries so as to reduce their dependency on China. And here, India is at the pole position. So when companies or when countries want to de-risk away their supply chain, India becomes a very important alternative. And naturally, signing a trade deal with India would mean that the goods being manufactured into India would reach the Western economies at a much lower tariff rates. Similarly, India also offers manufacturing scale, and it also offers cost advantage on the account of low labor and input cost. And this can be seen in many sectors like electronics, auto components and pharma. The products from these sectors are in high demand in Western markets because of their quality and because of their cost effectiveness. Similarly, in the past few years, India is seen as a credible polity, as a credible economy. So much so that the recent FTAs that I told you about, the most important being the FTA with EU, the FTA with United Kingdom, the FTA with Australia and New Zealand, shows that other Western economies except US were also mindful of the fact that India gives them a policy credibility. And India's prospective deals with many countries that are under negotiation also subscribes to this particular evidence. Also, for the past many years, more than a decade, India is under a stable political leadership. So when there is a stable political leadership, the economy grows beyond certain imaginations. Now, India for a long period of time is under the process of fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation means that the government is looking to reduce its spending, particularly reduce its borrowing. And this shows a positive signal to the global market that Indian economy is somewhat less vulnerable to the global disruptions that has plagued many other Western and non-Western economies. So these are the reasons: because of stable political structure, because of good aspiring economy, because of continuous urban and rural demand, because of the place which India offers as an alternative to China, all of the countries want to sign a trade deal with India. But despite this fact, there were many reasons which led to delay of the signing between India and US deal. First is the extractive negotiation policy of United States under the US President Donald Trump. Donald Trump for long subscribes to the kind of a negotiation strategy which you can say is very transactional in nature. They will give you certain concessions, but in return they will also expect you to make even greater concessions. Now, in this time period when US was negotiating with India, Trump continuously labeled India as a tariff king, which also signified that the amount of tariffs India imposed on its imports were higher than the more developed economies, and there is a very good reason for that. India used to impose higher tariffs on imports so as to protect its domestic industries, and there comes the asymmetry in the expectation that both of these countries wanted out of each other. Now, US wanted immediate access to all the products in the Indian market, but India, on the other hand, subscribes to an idea of calibrated opening. Let me give you an example. The most important deadlock between these two economies came in the agricultural sector, as we have seen is quite consistent with India's other trade negotiations as well. Now, US on one hand demanded access to Indian agricultural markets, and on the other hand, India resisted these demands in order to protect its own farmers. You need to understand 86% of farmers in India are small and marginal farmers whose yield and productivity are lesser than compared to the Western nations. So in order to protect these small and marginal farmers, India needs certain kind of restrictions on the imports, which India rightfully has the right to do. On the other hand, there were certain concerns relating to the import of GM-free certification. Now, India wants any animal products which is imported from United States into India to have a certificate that it is free from genetically modified crops and inputs. But US was not willing to give this because this kind of a certification adds to the cost of the product, naturally declining the cost competitiveness that the US products would face in India. Similarly, there were other industries also who were resisting the kind of changes that the government of India wanted to make. Let me tell you, there was a liquor industry in India which is quite dominant. Now, US wanted India to give less duty or impose lesser customs duty on bourbon whiskey imports. US wanted an immediate decline of the whiskey duty from 150 to 50%, but India was of the opinion that we will gradually decline it over a period of 10 years. So this was the asymmetry in expectation from both these countries. US wanted immediate reduction in the duties. India was of the opinion that we will give reductions, but gradually in a span of 10 to 15 years. So this was the first problem that both of these countries faced. Other problems was US tried to use India's Russian oil imports as a leverage. You need to understand, after the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, India saw an opportunity in importing cheaper Russian-made crude oil. But what happened due to this imports is that US and other Western countries became angry. Now, one of this reason of the delays of this trade signing bill was that US tried to leverage this opportunity out of India. India on one hand subscribes to a strategic autonomy foreign policy. India would do anything which is in its economic and security interest. But on the other hand, US wanted to say that why don't you reduce Russia's crude oil imports and only then we will try to sign a trade deal with you. So this puts both of these polity under significant pressure. India did not want to give concession, especially when US demanded it, and US did not want to lose out on its narrative that it's trying to corner Russia, and India's oil imports in the eyes of US was going against this strategy. And due to this back and forth negotiation, India also narrowly missed the 90-day tariff pause window, which was given by US President Donald Trump as he came into power. He gave a 3 months concession to countries so that in the meantime they can sign a deal with it. And as a result, India or Indian products in US saw as much as 50% tariff imposed on them. Similarly, at the same time, there was a deep geopolitical mistrust between the two governments, that is of India and US. And this is because of US use of trade policy negotiations in between the conflict that was between India and Pakistan. According to US President Donald Trump, US used trade deal as a leverage to announce ceasefire between India and Pakistan. On the other hand, India has a stand on these issues that any conflict between India and Pakistan is a purely bilateral matter and no country, no third country, including the US, has a say on this matter. So this is where the negotiation struck. India saw this attempt of US government as an interference in its foreign policy, as an interference in its sovereignty, and US, because of this mistrust that has developed between the two countries, the delay or the deal got delayed further. Now, what you need to understand, in the meantime, when US imposed 50% tariff on Indian goods, naturally India's biggest export market at that time was United States. So India wanted to do something in order to reduce this impact that will be there on Indian exports. You need to understand Indian goods exports across the world constitute 1.9% of global trade in merchandise. Similarly, India's service exports constitute 4.2% of global trade in service exports. And the biggest India's export market is US. So when Indian goods faced higher tariffs in US market, naturally India wanted to diversify away to other big markets including the EU. And that is why India fast-tracked free trade agreements that it signed with EU, United Kingdom, New Zealand, Oman as well as Australia. In the past few years, we have signed the same with Australia as well as UAE. And we have also revived the stall talks that has happened between Canada, Israel, Gulf Cooperation Council and the Eurasian Economic Union, which is led by Russia. Now, India also switched markets of its important export products. One of the important export products are gems and jewelry, and US was one of the key destinations to it. So what India did, it shifted it away to United Arab Emirates, to Hong Kong, to Belgium. Similarly, for auto components, the trade was shifted to Germany, Thailand, UAE. For marine exports, it was shifted to China, Japan and EU. And at the same time, India did many policy corrections as well. India for the past few years had imposed a quality control orders which added to the cost of products that were made by MSMEs, and this in a way reduced the cost competitiveness of the MSME products that are getting in the markets. So India rolled back these quality control orders so as to make MSME products more cost effective, and it removed the 11% cotton import duty in order to reduce the cost of inputs which plagues the garment sector. You need to understand garment sector is one of the most important export products of India, but at the same time it is a very low margin industry, and as a result, by reducing the input cost, you are looking to make your products in the export markets more cost competitive, especially when these products are facing higher tariffs in the United States. Similarly, there are many industries that struggled at the same time. The pain actually surfaced in vulnerable sectors, garments being one of them, leather, sport goods. These feared lasting damage. Now, there is a very good reason for why these industries are called as vulnerable industries. First of all of these industries have a very weak shock absorption capacity because these industries work on very low margin. They are labor intensive in nature. They have low scale as compared to corporations because most of these industries in these sectors are micro, small and medium enterprises. And at the same time, all of these sectors face intense competition from India's geo-economic rivals like Sri Lanka, like Vietnam and Bangladesh. So that is why it became urgent for India to sign a trade deal with United States so as to reduce the negative impact that would plague these sectors because of the common issues all of them face. Now let us understand what was the influence of both of the political leaders on India. What was the influence of Narendra Modi in the policy making, and from the US perspective, what was the influence of US President Donald Trump? Now, on one hand stands US President Donald Trump, who basically uses tariff as a measure to coerce other countries into agreeing what he is demanding. Sometimes he has linked tariffs with trade, sometimes he has linked with geopolitics, as we saw during the negotiations that happened during Operation Sindoor, and at the same time, he has also tried to leverage India's energy purchase from Russia as a means to coerce India into signing the trade deal. Now, All of this policy measure from the part of Donald Trump and the US government was meant to pressurize India publicly, and it was done repeatedly with an intensive manner. On the other hand, let us understand what Indian government led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi did. Indian government and Narendra Modi, they chose quite concessions over confrontation with the US government. If the confrontation would have happened, then the ego of both of these leaders would have come in front, negatively impacting the possibility of the trade deal. Rather than that, India preemptively cut the duties in this year's budget, and this was shown as a business as usual, not negatively damaging the political aspects of the Indian government. At the same time, India recently opened its nuclear sector through Shanti Bill 2025, where there is a privatization where even private companies can now operate and build a nuclear power plant. Now, what do you think, or which companies from which countries do you think would benefit the most? It is none other than the United States of America. At the same time, India has also increased the imports of US procured energy gas as well as the crude oil. And that is why this was done to reset the trust that was broken between the two economies. Now, while doing so, both of these leaders, their personal rapport also helped in the negotiations. If you look at it, both of these leaders yesterday framed the signing of a trade deal as driven by friendship. So this helped the political optics of it. None of these two leaders were seen as compromising on their stand. So it was the friendship that helped in signing of the trade deal after both countries stood on their ground, especially India, and they tried to address all of the concerns of the other party preemptively and in a gradual manner. Okay, not under pressure. Now you must be thinking, what is the impact of this trade deal? So let us understand this. First straight impact is the tariff cut on Indian exports. After the imposition of tariff, Indian goods were subjected to as much as 50% tariffs in US market, and because of that, our exports into US decrease. So the natural beneficiary out of this trade deal would be the Indian exporters. Similarly, because of the imposition of tariff, it was also seen that the cost of goods and services, especially of the imported goods, rose in United States economy, and that contributed to inflation, which again has negative impacts on the economy. So that is why after signing of this trade deal for US, it would help them cool down the inflation in their domestic economy. Now, as far as capital flows into Indian economy is concerned, that is basically driven by the trade prospects that Indian economy has. As the trade deal was not signed, we were subjected to 50% of tariffs on our exports. This resulted into outflow of foreign portfolio investment. And when outflow of foreign portfolio investments increase, the value of dollar in Indian economy increases, and correspondingly the value of Indian rupee would depreciate. So signing of this trade deal would help reduce the foreign portfolio outflows out of India, and this will help reduce the depreciation of Indian rupee, which has depreciated to an alarming levels of 91 rupees for every $1. Similarly, one of the important sectors that is the focus of Indian government is the electronic sector, and US is largest market as far as Indian electronics export is concerned. So after signing of this trade deal, there's a potential that both of these countries in a near future may include $100 billion worth of electronics export, and India in this way stands better placed than its rival companies like Vietnam, like Taiwan. Similarly, India has also tried to import the US purchases of oil and crude as oil, natural gas products, and this helps India in achieving the energy security requirement, which would not have been the case had India reduced Russian exports and not brought the imports from US, right? So this is how it has impacted positively both Indian and US economy, and more positively it has affected the Indian economy. Now let us understand, how does this signing of a trade deal solidifies India's geopolitical and geostrategic position? Now, this sends a strategic signal to the global economy. This sends strategic signal to the other countries that this tariff rollback, it is confirming India's stand or India's role as a trusted partner of the US. Here, India is seen as an equal partner of the US, not just as a market for US-made goods and services. Similarly, it also helps Western countries to double down their China or counter China positioning. Now, Western countries for the past few times, they have imposed anti-dumping measures on China, which is a kind of a tariff measure you imposed on products that originate from China. So when Chinese goods are subjected to higher tariffs in Western markets, who would naturally stand to gain? None other than Indian economy. But that doesn't mean India has subscribed to an altogether anti-Chinese policy. You need to understand India is aligned with US, but that is just an issue-based alignment. India is not aligned with US on each and every aspect. And therefore, and the reason behind this is because we naturally and we structurally depend on China. So much so that $112+ billion worth of imports we still do from China, and China has a stranglehold over exports of rare earth elements, which play an important role in defense, auto sector as well as electronics. Now, what is India's balancing act here? India is trying to align with US and European Union only in economy. That is an issue-based alignment, and at the same time, India has avoided taking an overt anti-China bloc politics position. So this helps Indian economy to reduce the pressure that it was subjected with respect to US economy, and it has at the same time has diversified its trade away from China so as to reduce the dependency on it. Naturally, signing of this trade deal would send a good signal, which would mean more portfolio and foreign direct investments into India, and this would reduce the pressure that the Indian rupee was subjected to as far as recent depreciation is concerned. Altogether, it is a good news for Indian exporters because their products will now face lesser tariffs as compared to earlier. Earlier it was 50%, now it will be 18%. So this is all for today's discussion. There is an important question that appeared in UPSC Prelims in 2023. We'll take a look at it. But before that, let me tell you a very important announcement. Right now, we have started with admissions in our February batch for resolution batches. Resolution batches are essentially P2I foundation batches, where teachings and classes for each and every subject of UPSC is covered along with CSAT, and you also get access to one-to-one mentorship to test series. Now, these batches are offered separately for students who are looking to give exams in 2027 and 2028. Both of these batches separately start on 7th of February. To take admissions to these batches and to not lose out on an important time that you have right now, please go to our website, and before you make a payment, please remember to use the code ATS Live. This code will help you fetch maximum discounts on all the courses that are offered in StudyIQ platform, including resolution batches, including optional subjects as well. So please keep that in mind. You learn to thrive by using the code ATS Live. And the question that I promised you at the start, this is the question that appeared in 2023. Do let me know the correct answer of this question on the comment section below, and what do you feel about this trade deal? Please do let me know on the comment section as well. Did Indian government do right with the negotiations, or was there something you were expecting more out of the Indian government? Please do let me know your position, and the notes, if you want to download them, they will be made available on this particular Telegram channel. The channel's name is ATS Live and the QR code is here if you find difficulties in locating the channel. So this is all from my side. Please have a very good night. We'll see each other again.